Welcome, everybody. Good evening. I'm Maria Gellner, FAM's Director of State Policy. FAM welcomes you to the launch of our new policy briefing series. This series will provide an overview of each of our core issues at FAM. Future policy briefings will include clemency, mandatory minimums, second look, and compassionate release. Tonight, though, is all things independent prison oversight. What is it? Where is it? Who does it help? To answer these important questions, we have with us tonight experts from around the nation. Michelle Deitch is a distinguished senior lecturer at the University of Texas at Austin, where she holds a joint appointment at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs and the UT School of Law. She directs the Prison and Jail Innovation Lab, called PJIL, a national resource center focused on the safe and humane treatment of people in custody. The Prison and Jail Innovation Lab is also home to the National Resource Center for Correctional Oversight. Michelle is widely recognized as one of America's leading experts on the issue of correctional oversight, and she has written and published extensively on this topic. Among other publications, she wrote, "But Who Oversees the Overseers? The Status of Prison and Jail Oversight in the United States." Michelle co-chairs the American Bar Association's Subcommittee on Correctional Oversight and helped draft the ABA's policies on this issue. She also previously served as full-time court-appointed monitor of conditions in the Texas prison system, as a policy advisor to the Texas legislature, as a policy director of Texas's Sentencing Commission, and a consultant to criminal justice agencies around the country. Ronald McKeithen is the Reentry Coordinator Advocate for the Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. Ronald is also a formerly incarcerated artist, advocate, and writer who spent 37 years in Alabama prisons under the Habitual Felony Offender Act. Ronald grew up during the height of the civil rights struggle in Alabama and was convicted of robbery in 1984. He was sentenced to mandatory life without parole under Alabama's 3 strikes law at 21 years of age. During his time in prison, Ronald devoted himself to learning, creating art, and mentoring other incarcerated people. He earned his GED, became a licensed barber, artist, poet, led book clubs, and debate programs. Ronald did not speak to a lawyer for over 35 years and finally was put in touch with Alabama Appleseed. They took on his case, and on December 16, 2020, Ronald left Donaldson Correctional Facility to begin the next chapter of his life in the very community that worked to secure his release. Ronald lives in Birmingham, works with Alabama Appleseed, and continues to mentor young people in the community who face struggles similar to those he did many years ago. Terry Schuster is the Corrections Ombudsperson for the state of New Jersey. He heads up a state agency that provides independent oversight of New Jersey's 9 state prisons and 11 halfway houses in order to protect people in custody from harm. The office investigates individual complaints of mistreatment. They inspect facilities and prison operations, troubleshoot individual and systemic problems, report their findings to the public, and make recommendations for changes in law and policy to do better to safeguard the health and safety of incarcerated people. Terry is also an attorney and generally a criminal justice policy expert. Before his appointment as the ombudsperson, he led and managed an interdisciplinary team at Pew Charitable Trust that spearheaded state campaigns to safely reduce correctional populations in Michigan, Louisiana, Alaska, and Utah. He also served as a special assistant to the federal court monitor appointed to oversee litigation related to conditions of confinement in Ohio's juvenile prison system. So we have an exciting discussion for you tonight, and I want to get started right away. Michelle, what is independent prison oversight? Why do we need it, and what does it do?
Well, that's the fundamental question. So we've got to remember prisons and jails are among the most opaque public institutions in our society. Correctional staff exercise total control over the lives and well-being of people in custody, and abuse, neglect, and harm can thrive when you've got no external scrutiny. Also, we can't even answer basic questions about what's happening inside our prisons and jails. We don't know how safe or how dangerous any particular facility is. So the goals of oversight are to improve transparency of our prisons and jails and to increase accountability of agencies for ensuring the safe and humane treatment of people in custody. You want, through oversight, to be able to identify problems early before they become bigger problems, people are seriously harmed. So what does this oversight look like? What we're talking about here tonight is having an entity that is external to the Department of Corrections that does routine monitoring inspections of prison facilities. We're looking for entities that have what we call golden key access, meaning they can go anywhere in the facility at any time without prior notice, talk to anyone confidentially, look at anything, go into any part of the facility. We want this entity to be able to issue regular, publicly available reports that focus on the safe and humane treatment of people inside. So asks questions, how are they being treated? And we want this entity to gather information from a range of different sources, including from confidential interviews with people who live and work inside the facility. In some cases, this independent entity might also be an entity that investigates and resolves complaints about the complaints of incarcerated people, but it doesn't always do that.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Can you give our audience some examples of successful independent oversight models and what they look like?
Sure. Well, in this country, it's important to point out that it's fairly rare as opposed to Europe where they're much more established. But in the US, we have some wonderful examples. So you'll hear in a little while from Terry Schuster, who's the head of New Jersey's oversight body, which is the Office of the Corrections Ombuds, which is doing just terrific work. Washington State has an excellent independent corrections ombudsman. New York State has the the Correctional Association of New York. Pennsylvania's got the Pennsylvania Prison Society. Illinois has the John Howard Association. Hawaii has a new Office of the Correctional Investigator. There are new entities that have recently been established in Connecticut, in Virginia, in Maryland, and a brand new one for the Federal Bureau of Prisons as well. There are lots of different names for these entities all over the country. They all have somewhat different functions. They're not identical by any means. They have different authority, different mandates, but they're all focused on one objective, which is to ensure the safe and humane treatment of people inside.
Thank you so much. So for our audience, as Michelle has laid out, there are many different models in different states. But as she said, it's actually still rare in this country. So remember that there are 50 separate state prison systems. To create independent prison oversight, like Michelle described, someone would have to introduce a bill in the state legislature. It takes a long time for bills to become law, and it's hard. Please look at the National Resource Center for Correctional Oversight website, which Michelle runs and we will put in the chat. And you can see on that website a map of the country, which shows which state have which models and what they do, what their budget is, how many staff they have, etc. It's a really, really fantastic resource. I want to turn to Ronald next. Ronald, you served 35 years in Alabama state prisons. What did you see in that time, and how do you think independent oversight could have benefited you and your family had it been in place? Ronald, I'm sorry, I believe you're muted. Would you mind unmuting?
Okay,
thanks so much.
Forgive me. I saw chaos. I saw a lot of murders, substance abuse. I saw beatings, stabbings, and I saw a lot of abuse that was done by officers. But the main thing that was going on, there was so much lack of hope. The tension in prison was so thick to where if you walk in a dorm, you can tell that something done happened or something is about to happen. The violence was so bad that you would be foolish not to have a weapon, because the officers, because of understaffing, you didn't have a lot of protection. I've been out going on 4 years, and I've spoken to guys in there where it won't be an officer in the cube. It'll be like guys fighting like gladiators with knives. Some places in Donaldson, for instance, that doors will be locked, no officers in the cube, and everybody has to just fend for themselves. But at times there was some good things going on. They had educational programs, and that was giving hope. But you got to understand that the Alabama prison system has been sued twice by the Department of Justice, and I was there both times, and they made a list of everything. That's about 90% of it was accurate, but there was not a change. Nothing changed. To this day, it's even gotten worse. And our governor, there have been complaints, there have been pleading, families, but she has this thing where they want Alabama to continue to do it the Alabama way, which is to continue to have these prisons. They're like modern day plantations. Seriously, the way people are treated, the way they're denied. And it's hard to really not go mad in there. I've seen people just overdose and use drugs just to try to numb their brain because they're just tired of the same thing. And there's not many incentives. And the reason why an oversight committee is needed, because it will save lives. Because the medical, when it comes to medication and sickness and illness, guys are in wheelchairs with one leg. Guys are so many outpatients, mental health outpatients, and they're all like seeking drugs. It's crazy in there. And I was blessed and lucky to make it out alive, to be honest with you, because I saw many of my friends die and just give up.
Ronald, we're so happy that you're here. It is not an easy thing to share those experiences. Those are traumatic, deeply personal experiences. And I'm really thankful for what you shared with us tonight. Thank you. Terry, you are embedded in the existing system as the ombuds for the state of New Jersey. What is your perspective of independent prison oversight and how it operates in practice?
Hi, everyone. So we have a team of 23 people. We've got a smaller prison system in New Jersey than in some other states. So with our team, we're able to be on site, on the ground in every prison multiple days each week. And part of the job is walking around and just asking people, how are you doing? What's going on? Anything we need to know. Part of it is, we field individual level complaints, and we also try to look at system level things that impact large groups of people. And so we are often, our folks who are on the ground day to day are going to talk with people face to face about the things that they're trying to bring to our attention, or we're going to meet with the sergeant on that housing unit, or we're going to meet with the administrator, or whoever's sort of whatever level of decision maker might have authority to address the thing. Not necessarily for us to step in and advocate for the person, but to try to understand, is it true, the thing that we heard? Try to get a sense of what, what's going on, why was this decision made, that sort of thing. And at times to call something out that hasn't been fixed, or this, call something out where the policy hasn't been followed, call something out where there's an easy fix. So sometimes it's small. Sometimes it's like, hey, it's cold and this guy doesn't have a coat. Can we get him a coat? Sometimes it's really big. It's like we went to, we have an extended care unit, which is like a nursing home within the prison. And we have nurses on our staff who would go and, talk to patients in that setting, find out that you sort of look at their wound care and hear complaints about it's not being done right, or it's not being changed, and my wound is getting worse, and then kind of call out to like the nurse manager or the leadership of the agency that provides healthcare in the prisons, and say, well, here's what we saw, and try to kind of solve something big or say, hey, there's all these bedbound patients and they have no way of getting someone's attention when they need help. Can we get a call bell system? And trying to sort of come up with policy fixes. So I think at our best, we're trying to solve little problems and big problems and be at the policy table with the folks who are running each individual prisons and the whole prison system altogether.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, and that you included some examples of successes that you might consider both small and large that your office has worked on. Are there any other recent achievements from the New Jersey Corrections Ombuds Office that you want to highlight? And also, what are some of the challenges you face as a corrections ombuds person?
Sure, yeah. So what are some recent successes? We've been tracking this one housing unit that is pretty troubled. We went in April, and we'd heard so many complaints over the winter that we went in early spring and just kind of went door to door and surveyed the population there. And we went to like 115 cell doors to talk to people. And the large majority of them said they have no toilet paper. They haven't gotten toilet paper in the last 2 weeks. They don't have a change of underwear. They haven't been out for a shower in 10 days, 12 days. They don't have any soap. They don't have any cleaning supplies. They can't turn on a fan because they've turned the electricity off, so you can't plug a fan in. People saying they're, they can't get the nurse's attention if they need to. The social worker comes but doesn't actually come to the door, and so we can't get, I can't hand anyone a grievance. So really extensive problems that are really scary. We're not just not meeting the basic sanitary needs, but if somebody has a medical emergency, it's hard for them to get someone's attention. Everybody's sort of locked in a cell. And so what we were able to do is kind of write down what we saw and quantify it based on this survey data, send the Department of Corrections a draft of what would be a public report, and say, hey, I'm going to come back. I'm not telling you when I'm going to come back, but I'm going to come back several times. And eventually this report's going to be public. And so we came back 8 weeks later, and everybody had toilet paper. Everybody had a recent shower. They were getting showers 2 or 3 times a week, which isn't great, but it was better than it was. They were getting out for recreation. They were able to see the nurse. They were able to file grievances. They were able to get on the phone. They were, they had laundry all of a sudden. They had trash pickup. They had soap. And it's still, there's still a lot of problems on that housing unit. There are still some bigger kind of policy discussions that we want to have more publicly, but our public report is partly going to celebrate, look what the department did, look how responsive they were when we called out really serious problems. We did a facility inspection last month where we were, again, kind of going cell to cell, but for a whole facility, not just at one housing unit. And started seeing that people didn't, hey, do you have a blanket? Do you have sheets? Do you have a pillow? And, and the first person said, oh, I don't have a pillow. And then we get to the next door, and he says, oh, yeah, I don't have a pillow. And we start asking every single person, do you have a pillow? Do you have a pillow? And most of the population said they didn't know they were entitled to a pillow. And when we asked officers had different understanding about why it was. It was like, oh, I think they can buy it through the commissary, which wasn't true. Or, oh, I think they all got taken away because they were flushing them down the toilets, which also wasn't true. And so we found a lot of things in that inspection, but one thing that we could very quickly solve was get 1,200 people pillows. And then the larger things that we are going to take some more time are like, well, here are the photographs of the kitchen, and here's some really serious conditions that impact the the food that everybody's eating and whether it's okay to eat, and not just what the incarcerated people are eating, but the officers' dining hall. Like the kitchen there was actually much worse than we thought it would be. And so we got the photos of that. Well, so ideally what we're doing when we're showing up is being a neutral set of eyes. We're the eyes and ears of the public. We're citizens. We're not civilians. We're not law enforcement officers, and we're not decision makers at the Department of Corrections. But because we have independence and we have that golden key, and we get to come in and we get to take pictures and we get to ask questions, it puts the department on the spot to say, hey, I want your report to say that I fixed it, and not just to say that it's a problem. And so we have some leverage just because we have to report everything publicly.
Thank you so much. Briefly, Terry, what's challenging about it? What are the
Right.
top 1 or 2 challenges in the role?
I think it can often be hard to determine what's true. There'll be people that have different versions of the same story, and even when we kind of dig a bit, it's hard to really substantiate, something like an allegation of retaliation. It's really hard to look into it and say, yes, it absolutely happened, and yes, it absolutely was retaliation. We often will get requests for a type of help that we can't provide and that we shouldn't provide, where somebody goes through the disciplinary system and they want to appeal how it came out for them, and they want to appeal to us. And we have to kind of do some boundary setting where we're saying, look, I can't do the Department of Corrections' job, because if I step in and I do the Department of Corrections' job, or I'm involved in management decisions, or I'm telling the department what to do, then I'm not independent from the department, and the department's actions are then my actions, and there's not enough sort of separation. And so our job often is trying to put the pressure where the pressure belongs. Like the disciplinary system needs to work well for everybody, and it needs to be run by the Department of Corrections. The grievance system needs to work well for everybody, and it needs to be run by the Department of Corrections. And so often we're trying to sort of put ourselves in the seat of the prison commissioner and say, gosh, that's a hard problem. How would you solve that? And be at the policy table with her and with her executive team as outsiders, and be asking some tough questions, but leave the authority in their hands. And that's often really hard to tell to the people that most want us to come in and fix things for them.
Sure, I can imagine. Thank you so much. That was really enlightening. I want to turn back to Ronald. Why should heads of corrections departments welcome independent oversight? And why also should incarcerated people and their families?
Well, the Alabama prison system, they really have gotten away from rehabilitation, and they've started depending on outside people to come in and present programs and do classes. It seems that the Alabama committees, in Montgomery, the legislators, they're not really interested in prisons because, well, that's not going to give them votes. They'd often use prisons as a platform to say how we need to lock everybody up. But the one thing they're not realizing is the amount of bodies that are going out the back gates. They're not publishing the amount of suicide attempts. And they have been caught changing records. When a person goes, when I say a guy gets jumped by an officer and he goes to the infirmary to get a body shot, a lot of them wounds may not get written down because they have family members that's nurses and all of that. But the way the system is here, they desperately need someone to oversight to see them, and someone to, like, God, the way you walked into that prison, Terry, I wish that was possible here, but they do not allow people to just walk through their prisons. When you have a visit or a site visit, they usually take them to the honor dorm, which is clean, and you have guys in there that are seriously trying to make a change in their life. They looking nice, but you have other dorms they won't take them in. And right now it's so bad that fentanyl and ice, that they would just say a person done having these seizures and fell out. They just really, the officers just kind of step over them, and they'll count. And right now in prison you have a homeless population where guys are living actually on the floor in showers, in bathrooms, because the drug use had gotten so bad that other individuals will not allow them to sleep in the same cell or in the same bunk next to them because they're stealing everything. But if we can, a committee would give confidence, will give hope, because to be honest with you, guys in prison feel that society, they forgot about them. They feel that there's no way that society can't know what's going on in prison. And that's one of the reasons why they're just giving up hope. But we have been able now to get word in there, to get news in there of what we're doing, because it's a host of organizations that is willing to help and get involved. And I myself had to reach back and tell these guys that we were wrong, that people out here do care, and people out here fighting for change. But it's just that the powers that be that over us are just resisting, and resisting hard. They think that their solution to the prison problem is to build $1 billion prison, but not fix the problems within the prison, but just move the same issues into a shiny prison. That's not gonna solve it. That's not.
Thank you so much, Ronald. I want to talk about a positive step that occurred recently in independent prison oversight for a moment. We saw a major victory recently with the President Biden signing the Federal Prison Oversight Act, which you may hear referred to as FPOA for short, for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The Federal Bureau of Prisons incarcerates over 150,000 people and employs tens of thousands of staff members. It has an $8 billion budget, but has very limited oversight. The result has been disastrous for decades. Systemic violence of all kinds, including chronic sexual violence against incarcerated women, crumbling infrastructure and physical plants, chronic understaffing, which undercuts corrections' ability to provide meaningful rehabilitation, as Ronald just said, and much more. The Federal Prison Oversight Act, which was signed into law this past summer, is only applicable to federal prisons and not states. I want to be clear about that. We have many, many different jurisdictions. Each state in the country is its own jurisdiction, and federal is a different one. So the Federal Prison Oversight Act is only referring to our federal system and our federal prisons. This new law will do two primary things. Number one, it mandates the Inspector General to conduct comprehensive inspections of all public and privately run federal prison facilities to identify problems and recommendations and report the findings to Congress and the public. The Bureau of Prisons must also respond to all inspection reports with corrective action plans. Number two, the new law establishes an ombudsperson within the Justice Department to perform targeted investigations into issues that affect the health, safety, welfare, and rights of incarcerated people and staff. The ombudsperson will create a secure hotline and online form for people to submit complaints and inquiries. The law will give these oversight practitioners access to all Bureau of Prisons facilities and the ability to conduct unannounced visits and private confidential interviews. The law is hopefully going to be funded next year with an amount that will mirror 0.2 to 0.5% of the Bureau's annual budget. Michelle, turning to you, are there efforts in the states to fight for independent prison oversight?
Yes, that's one thing that's so exciting. We have seen just tremendous momentum around this issue in the last decade or so. And there's just been a swell of states that have passed oversight measures. There's also a whole lot of other states that have been engaged in the process of drafting legislation, filing legislation. And sometimes these make progress. Sometimes it just takes many, many years before it can pass. But there are some very, very strong efforts in many states going on. I'm in touch with many legislators around the country who are interested in filing bills and strengthening oversight bodies that do exist. But just to flag a couple, in Arizona, there's been effort to create an independent oversight body. The governor, in fact, created one by executive order, but there needs to be something that's permanent and created by the legislature with actual funding attached to it. So there will be a continuing effort this next legislative session to do that. Missouri, I know, has been very active on this front as well, and many, many other states as well. Another thing that's worth pointing out is that not every oversight body that exists has all the authority that it needs or all the resources that they need. And so there's been a lot of efforts around the country to strengthen those oversight bodies, to ensure that they have the resources they need to do their work effectively.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm curious, Michelle, you alluded to this earlier, but I'd love you to say more about it. Where does the United States stand internationally when it comes to independent oversight of prison systems?
So we are very far behind the rest of the world. So in Europe, it is standard. Pretty much every country that is in Europe is part of the OPCAT, which is the optional protocol for the Convention Against Torture, which requires every single country to have what's called a national preventive mechanism, which is really an umbrella term for a correctional oversight body. So that's standard practice in Europe. It's pretty much standard practice in every Western nation. In many countries, they've got way more than one. So in England, for example, England and Wales, they've got an inspectorate, which conducts inspections of the type that we've talked about. It has a separate entity called an ombudsman's office. And it also has what they call independent monitoring boards, which are groups of citizens, volunteer citizens, attached to particular facilities. So, every facility has its own independent monitoring board, and those citizens go into the facility on a regular basis. So they're seeing what's happening, they're reporting out issues as well. So you get it and there's other entities as well, but you're getting like a triangulation of information from all of these different bodies. So the US, again, is very far behind these other countries, but fortunately, we're starting to see how successful those other initiatives have been, and we are developing, as I said earlier, a lot of momentum around creating these bodies in this country.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Ronald, for you, having been inside, what do you think people listening need to know that they may not be considering? We have an audience that likely, from what I know, consists of a wide variety of folks who have been inside themselves, their families. I think we even have some lawmakers who may be listening tonight, people who are interested. What do you think folks need to know that they may not be considering?
Well, one thing I would tell people is to not really believe the media. Another thing is that there are so many brilliant men and women in prison that just need an opportunity. They just need someone to just be aware of what they're going through and make an attempt to make a change. What we've been successful is getting people to write the legislation, to go to meetings and speak up about what their loved ones are going through and what changes they need to have done. We have this thing going on now where people in prison are being extorted, are being kidnapped, and having family members that send thousands of dollars over a period of time just to keep them safe. And the prison system is aware of it. They know about everything, but what we need is that society to put pressure on them, to let them know that this can no longer go on. We need some people that's going to support the justice of the DOJ and what they're trying to do. And hopefully when they have this hearing that we can get change. But Alabama is just, oh man, you can't shame Alabama. I mean, honestly, you just can't shame Alabama. It's so many horrible things been going on for so long. And speaking about the grievance, I think that the Alabama prison system hasn't had a grievance process system in maybe 20 years. There's no one to complain to. They will send letters out to different people, but it's like, it's Alabama. And so what I need people to know is that the people in prison need your assistance. The people in prison need you to know that the conditions, the understaffing has been a cause for the changes that endure, because people have having to survive in prison. They can't even concentrate on trying to learn a trade or trying to just be an artist or just get involved in things because they're too busy worrying about who's going to get stabbed behind them, or what a drug addict is going to try to stab them and go to lockup because they can't pay their fees. I just want them to know that there are people in there that need you, and it's people that deserve to be in there. But like with me, I was just involved in so much, and it was a group of us with life without parole. I mean, the classes, we would create classes, but we didn't have classes. Everyone is not giving up in prison. And I try to be an example of the guys that can come out and do tremendous things. We have 18 clients, well, counting me, that are doing wonderful, that served 20, 30, 40 years, that had life without parole, that thought they was going to die in there. But now to see these guys come out and just live such a successful life. And we have this thing where we let the world know, especially Alabama, how these guys are doing, to encourage them that you can let some of these guys out of prison, especially those that have done long-term sentences and hadn't hurt anybody.
Ronald, that's really incredible to hear, and I'm with you. You know, understaffing is one side of the coin, and overcrowding and excessive sentencing is the other side of the coin. We can't address one without the other. I'm curious, Ronald, you got out in 2020. You mentioned that there was no grievance system. So you get out in 2020. Let's say, you know, when you were there in 2019, something happens that is not okay. There's violence, there's abuse or neglect or lack of something basic that should be provided to you. What would you have done? What did you do in 2019 when that happened? What was available?
Well, we had what we called mentors, older guys in prison that would try to have these meetings. We would have these group meetings and try to encourage the youth to get involved. What was so beautiful, one of the things we did in the chapel, we had this thing called Youth Connection, where we play this gospel rap. We would have all these gang bangers and all these supposed to be angry guys, and next thing you know, they're there singing Christian songs and stuff. But it's just so much going on that you can't really solve this problem overnight. It's so many small things that need to be fixed. But back then, there was no one to talk to. And with the disciplinaries, the way they would write them up, the way they would, and if you get to fighting and you're just trying to protect yourself, and the other person has a weapon, you would get wrote up for fighting without a weapon, and that person would get wrote up for fighting with a weapon. But you would still get the dictionary, and it would affect your good time, it would affect your parole, and all you're doing is trying to defend yourself because there's no officer around to help you defend yourself. And especially when you're getting jumped by 3 or 4 guys and you still get a dictionary for fighting without a weapon. How is that possible? You know? And if you could, people are giving up. I've seen guys tie sheets around their neck and jump and try to jump over the rails. I've seen guys drink window. It's horrible in there. And that's one of the reasons why we just need someone to just be able to walk in there and see it, because they can't hide it. It's too much going on. They can't hide it. And that's one of the reasons why they deliberately block people from coming in certain prisons here in Alabama. It's just crazy. It's saddening, and it still to this day hurts me what's going on with guys. And then right now, I've just been blessed to be able to get at least 10 guys that actually knew that's out now that I'm working with. And if you can understand the effects that Appleseed is having in other organizations of getting people out of prison, particularly with life without parole, and the hope that's happening in prisons now, because people were just giving up, but now they see that it's a possibility. And if we can get someone to come in and really just address these issues, it will stop a lot of the violence. It will stop a lot of the drug use, because they will know that, hey, somebody really cares, that something's going to change. And when you dealt with that for decades, you get the feeling that it's never going to change. It's not going to change.
Thank you, Ronald. Thank you so much. I want to ask Michelle and Terry the same question I started with Ronald. What do you think the folks listening need to know that they may not be considering? What's a misconception? What's something you want to tell them that you think they may not know? And we can start with Michelle and then go to Terry.
So one thing that I want to be clear is that oversight actually benefits staff and administration as much as it benefits the people who live in the facility. And it does that because oversight makes conditions safer and better for everyone. It helps improve, if you could reduce the amount of violence in the facility, that's going to improve the working conditions for staff. If you can persuade the powers that be that there needs to be air conditioning in a completely overheated facility, that's going to improve the work conditions for staff as well. And also, it's cluing the administration into problems at an early stage when they can still fix them before problems turn into scandals, before they turn into lawsuits, et cetera. So any correctional administrator worth their salt wants their facility to be as good as it possibly can be. So it's a win-win when you bring in oversight. It can help everybody. Another thing that I think is really important for people to know is that there's a big distinction between prison oversight and jail oversight. And I know that we're talking about prison oversight tonight. That's the focus of our conversation. But we get a lot of requests and a lot of legislators and local officials who want to create jail oversight. A lot of advocates concerned about that issue. And it absolutely is an important issue, something that needs to be addressed, but I think it needs to be analyzed very differently. We need to remember that prisons are run by the state. All prisons are under one agency, whereas jails are typically county-run facilities. So you can have a whole lot of different jails, all under different authority within the state. So you can have statewide oversight over jails, but that raises a lot of tension between the state and the counties. And you're also dealing with very, very different types of jails, from tiny little facilities that I call mom and pop facilities with 20 or 30 beds, or you could have giant urban facilities with 10,000 beds. So they're not similarly situated. And when you've got a statewide jail oversight body, it tends to be one that sets minimum standards and then assesses the facilities for compliance with those standards. But when I say they're minimum standards, I mean they are very minimum standards, because they have to be able to apply to both the little tiny facilities as well as the big facilities. And the focus doesn't tend to be on the safety and humane treatment of people in custody. You can also find local jail oversight where a local, say, county commissioner's board wants to exercise better control over the local jail. And that exists in various places around the US. It's still very rare, and it looks very different in every single location. So anyway, I wanted to flag that just because I don't want people assuming that jails and prisons are the same in this regard, but we do have to think about them quite differently. And the last thing is, I want to make sure that people are aware of the resource that we've got. If you go to prisonoversight.org, it is a one-stop shop clearinghouse of everything that you've ever wanted to know about prison oversight. And hopefully you can get a lot of your questions answered there.
It's an absolutely fantastic website, everyone. I refer to it weekly at least to find something out that I need to know. So definitely check that out, bookmark it, share it. 2 follow-up questions for Michelle. One, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if folks are interested in learning more about appropriate jail oversight, because FAM does hear from a lot of people about that. There are many jails in this country that have truly horrendous conditions. I'm talking about people being eaten to death by bugs, being medically neglected for weeks and months on end until they die of starvation. This is happening in America's prisons. Where can folks go to learn more about that? Is that something that your organization is working on, or do you recommend anywhere?
We are working on that very actively. I am in touch with many, many policymakers from around the country and many advocates on this very issue. Also, our prisonoversight.org website has a coming soon section, and we will soon be posting very similar sorts of information about jail oversight around the country. We're going to have interactive maps where you can click on it to find out about statewide jail oversight and local jail oversight bodies in the US. But I will say that the resources that are out there are slimmer than they are on the prison oversight side.
Thank you. That's fantastic to know. And my other follow-up for you is you mentioned, and I think explained really well, why this is a win-win for correctional administrators, correctional staff, incarcerated people, and their families. Better conditions benefit everyone who lives and works in the facilities. And they are often, not always, but often miserable places to work as well as to be incarcerated in. So thank you for explaining that. I'm curious if you ever hear from corrections departments or see corrections departments or staff support the concept of independent oversight.
I absolutely do. And the first place where I learned this lesson was many years ago when I was in the UK learning about oversight. And I went and talked to corrections officials there. And I'm like, what do you think about all this oversight that you're getting? And of course, they're like, well, initially we were very worried. No one likes to have anyone looking closely at them. But over time, we came to understand how this benefits us as well. And we now actually really appreciate the work they do. We get very good information from them, and we have good working relationships with them. So, I think a lot depends on the context in which that oversight is created, whether it's a hostile environment, whether or not it's there's a lot of tension there, whether the agency is fighting this every step of the way. But I think if an agency is open to the idea that there are ways that they can improve, then they welcome having this external body help work with them. It can be a very collaborative process when it's done well.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I'll note that FAM has definitely seen support from correctional staff in various jurisdictions where they would very much like there to be independent oversight. Turning next to Terry. Terry, are there any myths that you want to bust, misconceptions that you want to bust, or just things that you think our audience needs to know that we haven't discussed tonight?
Sure. Yeah, I'd really like to add on to things that Michelle said. We have sometimes like a journalist that has heard a rumor about something happening in prison and is going to write a story on it, and it's absolutely not true. And when they call over to the Department of Corrections and they hear from a Department of Corrections spokesperson who says it's not true, they don't believe them. And so then they call my office and I say, no, we looked into it. That is not true. We had a couple examples of this. So one was there was a water main break, which is an emergency in a prison. I mean, you could have 3,000 people in a prison all of a sudden not have access to water, not be able to go to the bathroom, not be able to wash their hands, nurses and people preparing food not be able to wash their hands. There was a water main break at a large prison facility that I think lasted a total of 23 hours before it was resolved. But people had called home, people had kind of riled up their family members showed up to protest, and they were saying on camera and to reporters that there's been no water for 3 weeks. And this was not true. And we were able to sort of be an independent party to say, look, we're there. I don't have a stake in this. I'm not running the Department of Corrections. I'm not trying to cover myself. I'm a neutral party, and I can tell you it's not true. And some similar things about, there was a rumor that officers had started a fight club at a particular prison housing unit. It was not true. We looked into it. We looked at all of the evidence. The Department of Corrections looked into it, looked at all of the evidence. We went and talked to everybody who lived there. We found out other things that were problematic that were happening in that unit, but we were able to sort of stand behind and with the Department of Corrections just to sort of lend our credibility to them at a time when the public didn't trust their voice to answer for something like that. I think there are other misconceptions too, that like, oh, it's going to cost so much money, and it doesn't. my office operates on like 0.2% of the budget that the Department of Corrections operates on. And their budget often goes up in extraordinary amounts for litigation, or for, there's like a building that we can no longer use and we had to, emergency funds for this and for that. So it costs a very, very small amount, and the bang for your buck in terms of the effectiveness of your corrections agency, and what the public doesn't want prisons to be comfortable, but they do want people to come out of prison better than they went in. They do want the prison system to be making the public safer. And there is so much that you can do with correctional oversight that helps get you there, and that calls out problems when we're not quite there. I think one of the things that I would try to put out there, I'm working in New Jersey, and New Jersey prisons are not Alabama prisons. There's a lot of good things going on in New Jersey prisons. I would hold up the college programs in New Jersey as really models for the whole country. I would hold up the reentry initiatives and the partnerships that they've developed. I'd hold up the efforts that the state has gone to try to do right by transgender people in prison, the efforts that the state has gone to try to create bilingual materials for people who are in prison who don't feel comfortable speaking English. And there are some prisons where people are out of their cells and they're in treatment programming all day. And we have a prison for sex offenders here that is just state of the art, where the people running it are extremely thoughtful. They have individualized treatment programs. They have groups that are extremely well facilitated, and everybody who's there feels safe and feels like they're getting a lot out of it and feeling hopeful about their future. So, there's sort of there's an opportunity in doing correctional oversight, not just to identify the bad and to try to draw attention to it in a way to get things solved, but also to identify the good and to, and to be an independent voice that can show up and say, no, this is really good. And sometimes the families need to hear that. There are a lot of people who have good reason to be skeptical of the system that is incarcerating their loved ones, and who often can't get answers from the Department of Corrections themselves, or from the facility administrator, or from a social worker. They'll call and nobody's picking up the phone, or they'll call and get a non-response response. In New Jersey, one of the things that's not great is that one of the punishments is taking people's phone calls away. And so we have people who get their phone calls taken away for 6 months or a year, or in extreme cases, we had somebody whose phone calls were taken away for 9 years. And that person's family can't talk to them, and they don't know what's going on, and they were never notified that the phone calls were cut off. They just stopped hearing from their loved one. And so we have hotlines where people can call us who are family members. People can call us from prison. And so we're often getting a panicked call from a loved one who's like, I don't know what happened. I stopped hearing from him. I hear from him every day. What's going on? Can you go check on him? Is he okay? Can you just tell me he's okay? Or they've gone through something truly awful, where somebody who is a family member of theirs missed several cancer treatments, and now their cancer has gotten so much worse, or they have engaged in some kind of self-harm behavior and had some really scary hospital incident, and they don't know what's going on. There are some things we can't tell them because it's confidential, or it's protected by HIPAA or something like that. But often there's nobody in the prison system that's going to say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Or there's nobody in the prison system that's going to say, that sucks. Let me see what I can find out. And that's a role that we can play too, is to try to give some level of comfort to family members that feel totally blocked out, and try to go check on people when mom is worried about him, you know.
Definitely. Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think it's wonderful that you're highlighting the good and lifting that up, so that there will be more and more good coming out of the system that you're working in. And I know that in various prison systems in America, there are rape clubs and there are fight clubs, and that happens very often in this country. Recently, FCI Dublin had a rape club in which, in California, a women's prison in which women were fairly systematically sexually assaulted. And the person who was charged with administering the Prison Rape Elimination Act there was actually convicted of sexual assault and himself. And so there is a lot of distrust. And I'm curious, among the many, many audience questions that people submitted tonight, both live and in advance, many people wanted to know, how do we protect our loved ones against retaliation? In the system as it is, we have seen many times that if we say something, we are punished for it in many, many different ways. So how do we know that if we report something to an ombuds or an independent oversight practitioner, that they will be protected? How do you address that, Terry?
I think this is a really, really hard question. And it's on everybody's minds. There are some times when people are reading certain things as retaliation that really aren't retaliation. There are other times when retaliation is easy to hide or disguise as normal practice, or as something that fell through the cracks. We generally try to give people an opportunity to say, I want to remain anonymous. I don't want you to use my name. I don't want you to use my loved one's name. There are some things we have to report. Like if you call our office and you report something that is like sexual violence, we have to report it. It has to be investigated by, not by us, but by the Department of Corrections Special Investigations Division. If you report that somebody is having chest pains, I have to report to the medical authority that, hey, this person's having chest pains. Can you see them? And flag it for the facility administrator. There's sometimes when I can't keep something anonymous, and we'll let people know. We have people who are on our phones during the day, and they're trying to both help people navigate the system and understand what are the rules, what are their opportunities, and how can they navigate it. Trying to be clear about when we have to use somebody's name, and trying to give people an opportunity to remain anonymous, or to give us a tip that we're going to investigate without using anybody's name, or without going directly to like the administration with that person's name.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. I want to thank our fantastic panelists, Michelle, Ronald, and Terry, for spending the last hour with us. And to our audience, please get in touch with us at famm.org, FAMM.org, if you are working on independent prison oversight in your state. We hope that you've learned more about independent prison oversight tonight and why it is so critical to our country right now. Thank you for spending your evening with FAM. Have a great night.